Hello, welcome to Weatherwise. I'm your host, meteorologist Nathan Scott. Today, we're going to go back and take a look at one of the most impactful events that affected Central Arkansas just around 11 years ago. It was April 27th, 2014, where a supercell thunderstorm developed one of the worst tornadoes to affect the state of Arkansas. I'm talking about the tornado that made its impact in Mayflower and also Vilonia. This is what the radar looked like, the rain data of the radar. This is from the National Weather Service of that fateful day. Clear hook echo signature, and where you see that bright magenta color, that is the actual debris being picked up from radar, because back during this time, we did not have dual pol. We did not have the ability to detect shapes in the atmosphere like what we do now. So the only way we could tell there was debris being lofted was where the rain part of the radar was picking up the potential of debris, and that certainly was the case as it made its way across Mayflower and eventually into Vilonia. I'm going to show you the velocity data coming up here in just 1 second, but this is what it looked like as that supercell developed right along the border of Saline County and Pulaski County, then just wound up into a massive tornado. It was on the ground 7:01 all the way until 8:11 that evening, on the ground for 56 minutes, just producing destruction wherever it went. Here's the velocity, and what we're watching is this couplet. You see that couplet, the brighter greens and the brighter reds. That tells us this cloud was spinning like a top, and it was an EF4 tornado, almost an EF5, but the National Weather Service said it's not an EF5 due to when they did all the surveys of the construction of the homes that were devastated did not have what's known as anchor bolts. Let's go back to that day, though, because when we take a look at the Storm Prediction Center, they were very focused on Arkansas. And the Storm Prediction Center are the ones that issue the outlooks. Now, back during this time frame, there was only basically a marginal risk, a slight risk, a moderate risk, and a high risk. There was no, actually there was no marginal risk, excuse me. There was no marginal risk or enhanced risk during this time. That came later down the road with, I think it arrived here about 2017, 2018 is when we started to go with 3 or 5 levels of outlooks. So here's a breakdown. There's a slight risk, there's the moderate risk, and the high risk, the best chance of where severe weather was located, was right over parts of central Arkansas and southwest Arkansas. And then you look at the tornado risk, and that just stands out like a sore thumb, because we had a 30% chance there was going to be a storm that produces a tornado within 25 miles of a point in that 30% zone. The hail risk was also up there. The damaging wind threat, not a big deal. All meteorologists were focused on this was going to be a tornado event. Now, I wasn't here in Arkansas when this unfolded. I was actually not too far away, though. I was in Jackson, Mississippi, and we got hit on April 28th. That was the Louisville tornado that affected Mississippi and actually did some significant damage to a hospital in that part of Mississippi. So it was a prolonged event of severe weather, not only for the 27th, but it continued into the 28th. When we take a look at what was unfolding that day, the Storm Prediction Center is in charge of issuing outlooks, but also they issue the tornado watches and other information throughout the day when they're looking at what's unfolding in the environment. So they highlighted us at 4:52. Remember, the tornado touched down at 7:01, and this is what they were really looking at. There was a warm front draped across Arkansas. As that warm front made its way off to the north-northeast, that was the dividing line between really the soupy air mass, the warm, humid air, versus the much more drier air and slightly cooler air. Look at the temperature difference. It's 67 in Searcy at this time, but it was 84 in El Dorado during this afternoon. And where this warm front was draped across, anytime you have a cell that latches onto a frontal boundary or any boundary, that causes some big problems because that can enhance the twisting motion of a storm. So they are looking at this and saying, yeah, Arkansas, we really have to watch out what's going to be happening here over the next few hours. Eventually, they did issue a tornado watch, and You see what the red letters say at the top of the screen, a particularly dangerous situation tornado watch, or PDS. I talked about this before. Anytime you hear a meteorologist say a particularly dangerous situation tornado watch, or PDS, that means our confidence in tornadoes is high, but also the confidence that there could be violent tornadoes, significant tornadoes is high. And there's a breakdown with this day. The likelihood, tornadoes high. EF2 or higher tornadoes high. And then severe hail also high. Meanwhile, everything else was at a moderate risk. Fast forward, 6/11 now. We've got cells trying to pop up over the Ouachitas. And they say right there, the greatest short-term tornado risk is right over Polk County, Garland County, Pulaski County, Saline County. So they had a good idea. They did an excellent job on looking at the environmental parameters and saying we are going to have trouble as the day unfolds in this part of the state. And then once that cell started to develop, they actually issued a very tiny mesoscale discussion. But again, they're saying near-term tornado risk, it's right there. So they were looking at everything coming together as the cell popped up in the perfect spot for things to go wild. And unfortunately, that was the case. Let's go over to Max 1 now, because we're going to walk you through how everything unfolded during that day with the actual path of this tornado. This is the tornado warning box, and all the triangles, that's all the tornado damage survey, and each color of the triangle represents the strength of the tornado. This tornado just hit the ground running and took off pretty much like a bullet. So this is where it developed, right over the border of Saline County and Pulaski County. And what's interesting here is usually it takes some time for a tornado to wrap up, I guess you want to say. You know, they hit fairly weak and then they intensify as they make their way along the ground. That was not the case with this one, though. It made its way over Brush Mountain, and then right here, 3 homes were destroyed and lives were lost as soon as the tornado touched down. So just poor timing for folks in this area. And what we're looking at for the future is how the geography played a role with how this tornado intensified. There's a hill here known as Brush Mountain. As this tornado intensified, it drew up air from the southwest, and that air had to come up and over the mountain. That most likely enhanced the flow and actually enhanced the wind speed of this tornado as soon as it made its way across the mountain. The National Weather Service has also done more research on the tornado that affected us here in Little Rock, March 31st, 2023, also saying the geography played a role in how the tornado strengthened and weakened as it made its way across the hilly terrain. So terrain does play a role in enhancing or weakening a tornado. That certainly is the case, and we'll get more into that just a little bit later. But there you see the tornado forms very close to Brush Mountain Trail, Turkey Trail, and Deer Road, and it was already an EF1, EF2 tornado at that time of its development. And then it made its way through North Point, still producing damage. After that, it went across Lake Maumelle, and then eventually the Arkansas River. And then here is some of the worst damage also to be felt at this beautiful location, the River Plantation Subdivision. They have a beautiful view of Pinnacle Mountain, and unfortunately they got hit very hard in that part of the state. I'm just going to go back over here to Storm Track 11, and this is the results. If we can go Storm Track 11 real quick. This is the pictures that came from the National Weather Service, and you see the homes are just wiped. And it just leaves you speechless on the one home closer to the top was not affected as much right there, but then these homes were just demolished as that tornado made its way through. And again, lives were lost in that part of Faulkner County. It made its way, we can go back over to Max 1 now, after it tore through the River Plantation subdivision. We can just take it full if you want to, Perry. It made its way through Mayflower as a very powerful tornado, producing devastating effects for the folks in Mayflower. Lives were lost in Mayflower. And then it went over Lake Conway and then made its way towards Vilonia. And as it made its way towards Vilonia, the tornado really started to widen and continue to become very strong. I think this was the most powerful part of the tornado, where you see that red right there. That's where the true magnitude of the EF4 strength and winds of this tornado were felt. I want to back this up just a little bit, because before it made its way to Vilonia, it had to cross, again, go over some hilly terrain. We got Round Top Mountain, I believe, pretty close to Mayflower, and then there's another hill just outside of Vilonia, and that probably enhanced the rotation of this storm. So before it made its way into Vilonia, it was picking up on more of that enhancement of the geography, it looks like. And then as it made its way right through the heart of Vilonia, there you see some of the streets and subdivisions were devastated and lives were lost in the city of Vilonia before finally the tornado dissipated just to north of El Paso into White County. So it was on the ground for 56 minutes. It produced a lot of devastation, and a lot of people to this day are still suffering from PTSD with any storms. Anytime we mention a tornado in the forecast, for good reason, those people are still very much scared of what could unfold, because, I mean, they basically went through just an awful time, the survivors of this storm. Coming up, we're going to talk to National Weather Service meteorologist Chuck Rickard. He was the one that was issuing the warnings during this awful time as this tornado was making its way across central Arkansas.
I guess you could say that it's always in the back of your mind. I mean, myself having worked a number of events in years past, it's like, you know, the potential's there. It's just like you almost tell yourself, you know, it could happen, but you don't know, you know, you don't want it to happen.
You had a severe thunderstorm warning issued probably. You were the one that was in charge of all those warnings. Tell me how that all unfolded.
It was a Sunday, which you take into consideration, it's like, you know, compared to a weekday or, you know, any time of day, it's like being the evening hours on a Sunday. It's like the thought initially popped in my head too. It's like, you know, how many people were home, you know, and maybe people, you know, going to church functions, they may be out to dinner. We like to say it tightened up, and that was probably one of those, you know, oh my gosh moments in simple terms, as far as when I saw that, and I was like, you know, this thing's producing a tornado, or it's about to very soon.
And then the trajectory of this storm was taken into Mayflower and Vilonia. What was going through your mind?
Yeah, I would say probably right then and there, and then just seeing the data from the radar, we knew there was something on the ground that was already doing damage, knowing that that area of Vilonia and Mayflower had been hit before, just several years earlier, and it's like, you know, it crosses your mind, it's like, is this going to be a repeat of that again?
When you saw it was picking up debris and how high that debris was going, what were you thinking?
I knew then and there it was, and then we also saw video, I think there were chasers on that storm along I-40, and just seeing some of the video, it's like it was just a monster. You're driving your vehicle on the interstate at 60 miles an hour, I mean, that's how fast the storm was moving. So it's for folks that may have just seen it or just didn't know it was coming, you basically have less than a minute maybe to even react or, you know, seek some kind of shelter.
You're thinking of families, you're thinking of possibly maybe somebody you know, your friends. Did you have anybody that you were looking out for in that situation that was real close to you?
At the time I didn't. I was just hoping that folks got the warnings and were able to seek shelter, I believe, but it didn't really become a national product until, maybe the mid-2000s. But that's told me that both their mom and their parents' house had been impacted in the Plantation subdivision there near Mayflower, and At the time I didn't know it, but then when the news came out about the couple where they were in the storm shelter and the door for the shelter was impacted by debris and basically collapsed the door, and that definitely hit home.
Talk about the next day.
I think the first area we did go into was that plantation subdivision. It's basically like a bomb went off. We started seeing just various houses, and I remember a big dump truck was moved. It's kind of I guess, mixed emotion still, even for that time period, because spots that you survey, somebody just 12, 24 hours ago was alive and doing what they do on a Sunday evening, and then just in an instant, their lives changed.
How has this event changed you as a meteorologist and as a person?
Anybody's life can change in an instant. At times I wish if I'd say put a warning out sooner, if that would have changed anything as far as folks that may have been impacted, if they could have done something different. It affects you. I mean, I won't sugarcoat it, but it's just, it's something that does stay in your mind, because it's, that's one of the days I'll always remember working, and here we are 10 years later, and it's still, thinking about stuff. I can still, in my mind, replay what happened that afternoon and that evening, and then especially the next day going out and seeing the damage itself. It's like you just don't, that basically imprints on your mind, and it's just a memory you just never forget.
Once again, thank you, Chuck, for telling us your story of that terrible day that you went through. Meteorologists, they launch weather balloons twice a day, and that day, this is the information that came from what the atmosphere could produce. This is a upper air observation. They launched a balloon, it went up into the atmosphere, and this is the data that came out. So let's take this full now. This is known as a skew-T, but basically I want to highlight two things. You see the winds here with my cursor. You have the winds at the surface coming in from the southeast, then they turn as you go up above the ground to more of a south direction, but they are high. I mean, this is a 30, 40 knot wind, about 2,000 feet. And then once you get to 5,000 feet, you've got almost a 50 knot wind. So the atmosphere had a lot of shear to work with. You look at the photograph in the upper part of the screen here where my cursor is circling, and that's certainly a curved photograph. And then one last thing, you got a lot of storm fuel in place. The storm fuel, the Cape, lower left-hand corner, over 2,000, even though the temperature with the red line was not that high. It was in the 70s, so it wasn't really a very hot day that this all unfolded, but we had enough wind energy for this one storm to take off, and it was just one storm that went wild. But look at the lower right-hand corner of the screen now, the effective layer STP, it is off the charts almost with a 10, and this balloon was launched at 7 o'clock. Before that tornado developed. So everything was screaming out to the meteorologists, something bad was going to happen, and unfortunately that was the case. If you want to see more of Chuck's interview and also the whole presentation we did last year, all you have to do is go to the THV11 YouTube page and look up 56 minutes, the deadly 2014 Arkansas tornado, because we have a whole 30-minute presentation all about that day. We're going to wrap things up here on Weatherwise, talking about the history of tornadoes in Vilonia. You may be surprised coming up. Arkansas is no stranger to having tornadoes. The good news is typically most of the tornadoes are considered weak. EF0, EF1. When it comes to the violent tornadoes, EF4 or EF5, the last time we had a EF5 or F5 tornado, that was way back in the 1920s with the Snead tornado that affected around Jackson County. We've never had officially an F5 or an EF5 tornado recorded since 1950 here in Arkansas, but here are all the EF4 and F4 tornadoes recorded since 1950. And look at the tracks. They primarily go from the southwest to the northeast. Now there's one weird track down into southwest Arkansas, but you see also the length of these tracks, because when you typically have an EF4 or an F4 tornado, the track is much longer, and that's just because the system is much more developed and can stay on the ground for a long period of time. This was before March 14th, 2025, so just keep that in mind. When we take a look at the history, though, for the city of Vilonia, this is the breakdown since 1950. And for some reason, I guess you could say Vilonia is kind of in a mini tornado alley. But you look at the contours, you can see there's hills in parts of Faulkner County, Greenbrier just north of Conway. You got that one, I think it's Round Top Mountain, south of Conway, and then you have another hill just to the east of Interstate 40, in between those pea fields. So this geography may be enhancing storms that do develop in this part of Faulkner County. There's your F2 and EF2 tornadoes in the red, your F3 and EF3 tornadoes in the purple, and F4 and EF4 tornadoes in the white. And if you take a close look here, what happened, of course, was back in 2014, we had the big EF4 tornado, but 3 years before that, there was a tornado that also made its way right through Vilonia, and that was an EF2 tornado. But all these tracks crisscross. So someone that's been living in Vilonia since the 80s has certainly experienced their fair share of twisters moving through that part of Faulkner County. Let's take a closer look at the tracks now from the EF4 tornado in 2014 versus the EF2 tornado back in 2011. They actually cross tracks, and there you see some of the same structures that were impacted by the 2011 tornado were also hit by the 2014 tornado. So my advice is, if you live in Vilonia, you want to definitely have a tornado shelter if possible, because the odds of having a tornado in that part of Faulkner County is probably higher than the rest of Arkansas. And again, it's probably because of the geography. So we have to watch any cell that makes its way across this part of Faulkner County very closely, just because there's little intricacies within the geography could enhance a cell and make a cell go tornadic versus other parts of the state. Thanks for watching WeatherWise. We've got some brand new topics coming up for future episodes. We're going to go away from weather maybe a little bit and get into more other sciences such as biology, maybe astronomy for future episodes. So make sure you stay tuned every week here at 3 o'clock. I'll have the latest episode. And if you have any ideas that you want to share, hey, I want to discuss this topic, or you want me to talk about this topic that you may have questions about, send me an email, nscott@thv11.com, or you can also reach out to me on my professional Facebook page. Have a great week, and I'll see you soon.